The dirt hitting the mahogany casket sounded like a final gavel. Malachi watched the box disappear into the earth, but he felt no grief. Only the hot, dry itch of resentment burned in his throat.
Steady, son, Ezekiah whispered.
Malachi felt his father's hand tighten on his shoulder. The old man's skin was the color of parchment, paper-thin from 3 heart attacks. His eyes were clouded with cataracts, fading a little more every day. Malachi gave a sharp nod. He couldn't show weakness here. In the Philadelphia Famiglia, weakness was an invitation for the wolves to bite. Every underboss was there. Even Thaddeus Billionaire had made the trip from New York. They all wore the same mask, somber, silent, and watchful. Rumors were already spreading about why Hadassah was dead so young. They whispered behind their hands, but they kept their distance. Malachi looked toward his children. Jedediah was 2 and just looked confused by the hole in the ground. Zilphia, only 4 months old, was a bundle of blankets in the maid's arms. They didn't understand they were motherless. The thought sent a fresh wave of fury through him. He shoved it down. The wake moved to the mansion. The air inside was thick with the smell of expensive catering and fake sympathy. Dorcas, the maid, handed Zilphia to Malachi. The baby finally slept after screaming for hours. Jedediah clung to Malachi's leg, hiding from the sea of black suits. "You look tired, Malachi," his father said, leaning on a walking stick. "I haven't slept since it happened," Malachi replied. The memory of Hadassah's blood-stained dress tried to surface. He buried it deeper than her casket. "The children need a mother," Hezekiah said, "and you need a wife to manage this house." "Hezekiah," his mother hissed, stepping closer. "We just put her in the ground." The old man didn't look away from Malachi. "We don't have the luxury of time." "Hadassah never cared for him anyway," Keziah muttered. Malachi's sister didn't bother to hide her bitterness. "Enough," Malachi snapped. "Not today. Every captain with a daughter is already calling," Keziah continued in a lower voice. "You're the only unmarried underboss in the outfit, Malachi. You're a prize." Thaddeus Billionaire approached, cutting the family conversation short. The capo shook Malachi's hand with a firm, cold grip. "If you need time away from your duties, take it." "No," Malachi said. "Philadelphia is mine. I'm not stepping back." Thaddeus nodded. "Good. Then we should discuss the future. My uncle Ephraim has an idea." Malachi led them into the garden, away from the prying ears of the soldiers. The summer heat was oppressive. "What is it?" "Ephraim Stoltzfus has a daughter who isn't promised," Thaddeus said. "A union between Philadelphia and Baltimore would make your position untouchable." Malachi frowned. Ephraim was a tolerable man, but he was only underboss because he married into the Billionaire line. "Why isn't she married yet? What's the catch?" Thaddeus and Hezekiah traded a look. "She was promised to a captain's son," Thaddeus explained. "The Bratva killed him last year." "And the wedding date?" Malachi asked. "November," Thaddeus said. "She turns 18 then." Malachi felt a jolt of disbelief. "She's almost 14 years younger than me. She's a child." "She's the best option," his father urged. "She's young, she's from a high-ranking family, and she isn't a widow. You don't want a woman with another man's ghost in her head again." Malachi's jaw tightened. He didn't want another Hadassah. He didn't want a woman who would bring more baggage or more children from a previous life. His own kids needed every bit of attention they could get. "I'll think about it," Malachi said. "But not today." 2 nights later, the decision was made for him. Zilphia wailed until her face turned purple. Jedediah sat in the corner of his room, silent and staring at the wall. The boy hadn't spoken a word since the funeral. Malachi stood in the hallway, head in his hands, listening to the echoes of a broken home. He called Ephraim Stoltzfus the next morning. "I'll marry her," Malachi said as soon as the man picked up. "But I can't wait. My children need someone now." "Wonderful." Ephraim beamed over the phone. "Keturah is a very caring girl. We will set the date for the day after her birthday. November." "Fine," Malachi gritted out. You should come to Baltimore in 2 days, Ephraim said. Meet her. We can discuss the feast. I don't care about the party, Malachi said. Have your wife handle it. I'll be there in 2 days. But I'm not staying long. He hung up and stared at the empty martini glass on his desk. He was marrying a girl he hadn't seen since she was a toddler. He didn't want a romance. He didn't even want a partner. He wanted a mother for his kids and a silent presence in his house. Across town in Baltimore, Keturah Stoltzfus sat at her father's dinner table. She noticed the way her mother was smiling, the same look she had when she found a designer sale. We've found you a husband, Keturah, her father said. Keturah put her fork down. Already? Who is he? An underboss, her mother chirped. Malachi Yoder. Keturah felt the blood drain from her face. She knew that name. Everyone knew that name. They called him the Butcher of Philadelphia. They said he was made of stone. They said his first wife died because she couldn't stand his cruelty. He's much older than me, Keturah whispered. He's 31, her mother said. A man of status. You should be grateful. Grateful to marry a man who might have killed his last wife? Keturah, her mother gasped. Watch your tongue. A man like Malachi won't tolerate that attitude. Or those bangs. You look like a child, not a lady. If he wanted a lady, he shouldn't be robbing a high school, Keturah muttered. Her father sighed and stood up. Let's walk, Keturah. They stepped into the humid garden. Keturah's heart hammered against her ribs. Dad, you told me he was cruel. You told me he was pitiless. To his enemies, yes, her father said. But Thaddeus assures me he didn't hurt his wife. He needs help with his children. I don't know how to be a mother, Keturah said, her voice trembling. I just graduated. He's coming here tomorrow, her father said, looking at the ground. Try to be kind. Your future depends on it. Keturah looked at the dark shadows of the trees. She felt like a lamb being tied to a stake. Tomorrow? She asked. Tomorrow, her father confirmed. Wear something sophisticated. Mom will lose her mind if she catches you out here, Keturah whispered to the empty hallway. Her mother had been very clear about the rules. There would be no meeting Malachi Yoder until the formal dinner. Until then, Keturah was to remain in her room like a doll waiting for its box to be opened. But the sound of the front doorbell was a siren song she couldn't ignore. Clad in her favorite denim overall dress with sunflowers on the pockets, Keturah crept toward the upper landing. She moved in silence, her bare feet finding the sweet spots on the floorboards that didn't creak. She knelt by the banister, pressing her face against the cold wood to peer down into the foyer. Her parents were already playing the part of the perfect hosts. Her father wore his official smile, the one he used for business deals, while her mother practically glowed with fake delight. Then the guests stepped into view. It wasn't hard to spot Malachi. He was a giant compared to her father. He wore a dark blue three-piece suit that made him look like a wall of solid muscle and expensive fabric. His face was made of sharp angles and dark, groomed stubble. He didn't smile back at her mother. He didn't even blink. He looked like a man made of stone. Keturah felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. He was a grown man, a powerful leader, and she was just a girl who liked drawing and Pilates. What could they possibly talk about? She knew the rumors. Men like him spent their time on violence and money. In 4 months, she would belong to him. She would have to share a bed with a stranger who might have driven his first wife to an early grave. She watched them move toward her father's office. Let's have some cognac and discuss the marriage, her father said, gesturing down the hall. Malachi gave a stiff nod. As soon as the hallway cleared, Keturah scrambled down the stairs. She didn't go back to her room. Instead, she slipped into the library. A thin connecting door separated the library from the office, and she pressed her ear against the wood, her heart hammering against her ribs. This union is good for everyone. Her father's voice muffled through the door. Have you told Keturah about the bond yet? The sound of her name in Malachi's deep, gravelly voice made her skin tingle. It was a heavy sound, like a bell tolling. Yes, last night, her father replied. And? How did she take it? Malachi asked. There was a hint of annoyance in his tone. She won't just be a wife. I need a mother for my children. You understand that, Ephraim? Keturah is very caring, her father said quickly. She's watched her brother's child. She'll satisfy your needs. Keturah's face burned hot. She had played with a toddler for 20 minutes once. She didn't know the first thing about being a mother. The men talked business for a while, their voices turning into a low hum of talk about kapos and territory. Then, the sound of chairs scraping the floor signaled the end of the meeting. Obadiah and I would like to relax before dinner, Malachi said. Of course, her father replied. Go through that door. The library is quiet. I'll bring Keturah down in an hour. Keturah's eyes went wide. She turned to run, but the door handle was already turning. She dived behind a tall mahogany bookshelf, pressing her back against the cold stone wall. Her father gave the two men a final smile and closed the door, locking Keturah inside with her future husband. Well? The man named Obadiah asked. Malachi sighed, the sound of a man who was losing his patience. Exhausting, especially the mother. I hope the daughter isn't like her. Keturah bit her lip, a spark of anger cutting through her fear. Have you seen her? Obadiah laughed. Keturah heard him pick up a silver frame from a side table. Look at this. Through a gap in the books, Keturah saw the photo. It was her at 9 years old, braces, messy pigtails, and a polka-dot dress. She looked like a total dork. Put that down, Malachi snapped. I feel like a predator looking at a child. I hope she got rid of those braces and those terrible bangs. Keturah's hand flew to her forehead. She felt a wave of pure humiliation. The schoolgirl look works for some guys, Obadiah joked. I don't want to marry a schoolgirl, Malachi growled. Keturah flinched, her elbow knocking a heavy book off the shelf. It hit the floor with a thud that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. Silence followed. Keturah tried to duck into the next aisle, but a massive shadow blocked her path. She crashed straight into a chest that felt like a brick wall. The impact sent her stumbling back. Her hip hit the corner of a shelf, and she let out a small cry of pain. She looked up, her face crimson. I'm sorry, sir, she blurted out. Malachi stared down at her. His eyes were dark and intense. He looked at her bare feet, her simple dress, and finally her face. I'm sorry, sir, he repeated quietly, his voice dangerously low. Obadiah chuckled from the corner, but Malachi didn't look amused. He looked frustrated. He studied her hair, specifically the bangs he had just insulted. Keturah tried to stand taller, though she felt like she was shrinking. Excuse me, sir. You shouldn't be alone with me. It's not proper. Malachi narrowed his eyes. He didn't move back. You know who I am? You're the underboss, she said, her voice trembling just a little. But my father is still my head. Honor says we shouldn't be alone. In 4 months, I will be your head, Malachi reminded her. He stepped closer, invading her space. You were spying. I was here first, she lied, though her wide eyes gave her away. Malachi sighed and looked at Obadiah. Give us a minute. Obadiah nodded and stepped out, closing the door. Now she was truly alone with him. Sit down, Malachi commanded, gesturing to the armchairs. Keturah obeyed, crossing her legs and trying to look like a grown woman. She failed. Don't call me sir, he said. My name is Malachi. Malachi, she whispered, felt strange on her tongue. I have 2 children, he said, pulling out his phone. Jedediah is 2. Zilphia is a baby. They need a mother. He showed her a photo. Keturah's heart melted despite herself. The children were beautiful. Jedediah was holding the baby with such care. She looked up at Malachi and gave him a genuine, soft smile. They're adorable, she said. I'm so sorry about your wife. I don't want to talk about her. He cut her off, his voice sharp as a knife. Keturah flinched and went back to tugging at her hair. Malachi looked her up and down again. Do you always dress like a child? Sunflowers and denim. Keturah frowned. I like these clothes. I like elegant women, Malachi said coldly. I'll send someone to buy you a real wardrobe. You need to look the part of an underboss's wife. And there will be no parties or dates. I don't want to be seen with you until you are legally of age. Keturah felt a lump in her throat. He wasn't looking for a partner. He was looking for a nanny he could dress up. Is that all you want from me? She asked. A change of clothes? Malachi stood up, his tall frame towering over her. He looked like he wanted to say more, but he just shook his head. Go back to your room before your parents find us, he said. Keturah stood up, her pride stinging more than her bruised hip. She didn't say goodbye. She turned and walked out of the library, her head held high even as her eyes blurred with tears. Behind her, she heard the door open and Obadiah return. What did you say to her? Obadiah asked. She looks like she's about to cry. Malachi's voice was cold and flat. I told her the truth. The air in Keturah's bedroom felt heavy, thick with the lingering scent of her mother's expensive perfume and the cold memory of Malachi's gaze. She stood by her bed, her hands trembling as she tried to smooth the fabric of her skirt. Malachi had been more than just intense. He was a wall of ice, demanding and dominant. The way he had ordered her to change her entire life, down to the very clothes on her back, made her stomach twist with a mix of fear and quiet fury. There you are. Where have you been? Her mother, Salome, burst into the room, her face a mask of frantic energy. She didn't wait for an answer before ushering Keturah toward the walk-in closet. We need to get you ready. For God's sake, Keturah, what are you wearing? Salome's hands were a blur of motion, tugging at Keturah's sleeve until the girl began to undress in a daze. Her mother paused, casting a sharp, suspicious look at her daughter's pale face. What is wrong with you? Nothing, Keturah whispered, her voice barely audible over the rustle of silk. Salome turned back to the dresses she had laid out on the velvet bench. I can't believe you don't own a single decent dress. Not one. Keturah looked at the colorful fabrics. She had spent years avoiding the official family events, hating the fake smiles and the way the men looked at women like they were prize horses. What's wrong with the dresses I own? Salome ignored the question, picking up a sky-blue dress patterned with white polka dots. It was a classic retro style, something Audrey Hepburn might have worn. Don't you have anything in a solid color? Something serious? No, Keturah said. It hurt that her mother had to ask. Her father, Ephraim, had always been the one to let her be herself. He was a conservative man, but he had a soft spot for his daughter that usually overrode Salome's demands. But today, the safety of her father's protection felt like it was slipping through her fingers. Salome sighed, thrusting the blue dress into Keturah's hands. This matches your eyes. Let's just hope Malachi isn't put off by this ridiculous style. And put on some makeup. You need to look like a woman, not a schoolgirl. I'm 18, Mom, Keturah muttered. But Salome was already halfway out the door. Wear heels, Salome shouted back. Keturah took a deep breath, blinking hard to keep the tears back. She knew the reality of their world. She had seen the way her cousins looked after their weddings, the faded light in their eyes and the bruises they tried to hide with heavy foundation. Her last fiancé had been a shy boy, someone she could have handled. Malachi was a wolf. By the time she made it downstairs, Keturah had forced a mask of calm onto her face. Her eyes were still warm from the threat of tears, but she kept her chin high as she approached the group of men. Her father stood with Malachi and a tall, silent man named Obadiah. Ephraim took her hand, his grip uncharacteristically tight as he led her forward. Malachi watched her approach. His eyes were a dark, bottomless blue. They didn't hold warmth. They held calculations. He looked at her polka-dot dress, and for a split second, a flash of pure disapproval crossed his features. Malachi, meet my daughter, Keturah, Ephraim said. There was a faint note of warning in his voice, but it didn't seem to touch Malachi at all. It's a pleasure to meet you, Keturah. Malachi's voice was like velvet over gravel. He took her hand, his lips brushing her knuckles. A shiver that had nothing to do with pleasure raced down Keturah's spine. She straightened her back, meeting those ocean-dark eyes. The pleasure is all mine, Malachi. Ephraim looked between them, his expression shifting into something like regret. He tried to puff out his chest, looking at the younger man with a hard stare, but Keturah saw the truth. Her father was a sheep in wolf's clothing. Malachi was the real predator. "This is my consigliere, Obadiah," Malachi said, gesturing to the man beside him. Keturah reached out a hand to Obadiah, but the man only gave a stiff, polite nod. She pulled her arm back, feeling a flush of embarrassment, and stepped closer to her father. "I'll send a new wardrobe over for Keturah," Malachi said, his tone casual, as if he were discussing a shipment of wine. "Tell your wife to take her measurements. I need a woman at my side, not a child." Ephraim's face went red. Maybe this was a mistake. I should cancel the agreement. Malachi stepped closer to Ephraim, looming over him. The air in the room seemed to freeze. "We shook hands on this, Ephraim. We settled the business with Thaddeus. It's done. Keturah is my fiancée, and no one, especially not you, is going to stop this marriage." The room went silent. Ephraim cleared his throat and looked at the floor. "I wasn't serious. I was just making a point." "Dinner is ready," Salome announced, appearing at the doorway. She stopped short when she felt the tension, her smile faltering. Malachi offered his arm to Keturah. She looked at her father one last time, but he wouldn't meet her eyes. The message was clear. Her protection was gone. She placed her hand on Malachi's arm, feeling the hard muscle beneath his suit jacket. If her father couldn't protect her, she would have to learn how to survive on her own. For months later, the wedding was a looming shadow. Malachi sat in his office in Philadelphia, staring at the amber liquid in his glass. His life was a series of calculations, and his upcoming marriage was the most complicated one yet. He had spent the morning trying to talk to his son, Jedediah. The boy was still grieving his mother, Hadassah, in his own silent, angry way. He had refused to look up from his screen until Malachi took it away. "Someone is moving in soon," Malachi had told him. "She'll be your new mom. She'll take care of you and Zilphia." Jedediah had exploded, his tiny fists hitting Malachi's legs in a desperate, futile rage. Malachi had felt a pang of guilt, but he pushed it down. He needed a wife to manage his household. He needed order. Now, he sat across from Thaddeus, the capo of their organization. Thaddeus was a man who demanded absolute loyalty and strict adherence to tradition. "My aunt went all out with the wedding," Thaddeus said, leaning back in his armchair. "Doves, ice sculptures, the works, even the traditional silk bed linens." Malachi took a slow sip of scotch. "There won't be a presentation of the sheets. I won't be sleeping with Keturah." Thaddeus's gray eyes narrowed into slits. The room went dangerously quiet. "It's tradition, Malachi. It's been the way of our people for centuries. It proves the bride's honor and the husband's strength." "She's a girl, Thaddeus," Malachi snapped. "She called me sir when we met. I'm 14 years older than her. I won't force myself on a child." "She's 18 today," Thaddeus countered, his voice cold. "She is a woman by the law and by our standards. You rule Philadelphia with an iron fist, yet you grow soft for a birthday girl." Malachi slammed his glass onto the table. "I'm not soft, but I have lines. I have a daughter of my own, Thaddeus. I wouldn't want a man my age touching her just because a contract said he could." Thaddeus watched him for a long time. In their world, defiance was often met with a bullet. Finally, the capo spoke. "You will present the sheets after your wedding night, Malachi. No discussion. How you produce the blood on those sheets is your business, but the family expects proof." Malachi stared at him. He realized what Thaddeus was suggesting. A fake. A deception to satisfy the old guard while sparing the girl. But was it a gift, or was it a test? If Malachi showed he was too weak to perform his duties, he was a liability. "I understand," Malachi said, his voice tight. "I'll do what is required." Thaddeus nodded, but the coldness remained in his eyes. Malachi knew he would have to be careful. One wrong move and his children would lose their father just as they had lost their mother. He would play the part of the ruthless groom, even if the blood on the silk was a lie. "We should get to the party," Thaddeus said, standing up. "Obadiah has been waiting." Malachi followed him out, his mind already spinning. He had to marry a girl who feared him, satisfy a boss who doubted him, and somehow keep his soul intact. He walked toward the door, his face a mask of stone. "Make sure the girl knows her place before the ceremony," Thaddeus added over his shoulder. Malachi paused at the doorway, his hand on the frame. "She'll do exactly what she's told." Obadiah held out a silver flask, the metal glinting under the dressing room lights. "For you." Malachi adjusted his silk tie in the mirror, tightening the knot until it was perfect. He didn't look at the gift. "I'm not touching the hard stuff today. I thought you might need it," Obadiah said, his voice dropping to a rough whisper. "In case you consider doing something as stupid as refusing the bloody sheet tradition again. Don't make a scene, Malachi." Malachi took the flask and shoved it into his internal jacket pocket without a word. The weight of the metal felt like a lead sinker against his chest. "Don't start," Malachi warned. Obadiah stepped closer, his shadow stretching across the floor. "I'm serious. Don't try that fake blood stunt. Thaddeus was baiting you. Trust me, he did what he had to do on his wedding night, even if his wife cried the whole time. That's the life. That's who he is, and it's who he expects you to be. Stop trying to be a better man just because you feel guilty about Hadassah." The air in the room turned cold. Malachi's hand moved faster than Obadiah could react, fingers clamping tight around his friend's throat. Obadiah's eyes widened, the brown irises watering as he gasped for air. "We are friends, Obadiah," Malachi hissed, his voice a low, dangerous vibration. "But I am also your boss. Show some respect." He held the grip for a beat longer than necessary before releasing him. Obadiah stumbled back, rubbing his neck and coughing. "I'm trying to keep you alive," Obadiah spluttered. "Keturah is a grown woman by the law. That's all that matters." "I know my duty," Malachi gritted out. "Get off my back." He hadn't seen Keturah in 4 months. The last time they met, she looked like a child playing dress-up. He could only hope her mother had the sense to use enough makeup to hide that youthful glow. He needed a wife, not a reminder of a life he didn't want. Obadiah managed a jagged grin, trying to find his footing. "Just do me a favor. Enjoy it. Tonight you've got a young wife waiting. Don't overthink it." Obadiah slipped out of the room before Malachi could snap again. The church was a cavern of cold stone and heavy incense. Malachi stood at the altar, hands clasped behind his back. To his right, Obadiah stood tall, looking out at the pews. Across the aisle, one of Keturah's bridesmaids caught Malachi's eye. She looked incredibly young, a stinging reminder of the girl he was about to bind to his life. Then the music swelled. The heavy oak doors groaned open. Ephraim walked in with Keturah on his arm. She wore a long white gown with lace sleeves that covered every inch of skin. Her hair was swept up, though her bangs framed a face that looked pale under the veil. She was smiling, but it was a thin, fragile thing. As she drew closer, Malachi noticed small yellow sunflowers woven into her hair and her bouquet. The bright color felt out of place in the grim atmosphere of the cathedral. When her eyes met his, he didn't see the submission he expected. He saw a flicker of defiance. Ephraim placed her hand in his. Her skin was clammy. She was trembling so hard he could feel it through her lace gloves. She looked older than their first meeting, thanks to the heavy cosmetics, but the innocence in her gaze was impossible to mask. During the vows, her voice remained steady. Her "I do" was firm, a performance of strength that didn't match the shaking of her hands. As they exchanged rings, she kept glancing up at him. She seemed to be searching for something. Sadness, perhaps, or a sign of regret. Malachi felt nothing but the weight of expectation. "You may kiss the bride," the priest announced. Keturah's eyes widened. She looked like a deer caught in high beams. Hundreds of eyes were on them, including the watchful, judgmental gaze of the capo. Malachi didn't hesitate. He reached out, cupping the back of her head to steady her, and leaned down. She froze. Her eyes fluttered shut a second before his mouth pressed against hers. He expected it to be a chore. He expected to feel the same cold distance he felt for everything else in his life. But as her scent hit him, something sweet like vanilla and spring air, a spark of genuine heat flared in his gut. The kiss was firm, a claim in front of God and the Famiglia. When he pulled back, Keturah's eyes snapped open. A deep blush stained her cheeks. She gave him a small, shy smile that made him feel a sudden, sharp edge of irritation. He straightened his jacket and looked away, leading her down the aisle. He could feel her confusion radiating off her, but he didn't acknowledge it. Outside, the air was crisp. Obadiah was the first to reach them, clapping Malachi on the shoulder with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "How was the first taste?" Obadiah whispered. Malachi scowled. "Keep your mouth shut." Obadiah ignored him and bowed to Keturah. She beamed at him, a wide, unguarded smile that screamed of her inexperience. Malachi watched her with a growing sense of disapproval. She would have to learn restraint. Hadassah had been a master of the mask, a perfect trophy who knew how to lie with a smile. Keturah was an open book, and in their world, an open book got burned. His eyes drifted to the sunflowers in her hair. They were whimsical, childish. "Why didn't you wear the diamonds I sent?" Malachi asked, leaning down so only she could hear. Keturah flinched, her smile vanishing instantly. Her parents were approaching, leaving her only a second to answer. "They didn't match the flowers," she whispered. "You shouldn't have chosen sunflowers," Malachi said, his voice like sliding steel. "Next time I send you jewelry, I expect you to wear it." "Understood." He didn't wait for an answer. He turned to greet her father, Ephraim, with a mask of professional courtesy. He felt Keturah's mother pull her into a tight hug, whispering something that made the girl's smile turn stiff and plastic. The reception was a blur of heavy food and forced conversation. Malachi sat at the head table, ignoring the girl beside him. He spoke with the men about business and territory, treating his wedding day like another board meeting. From the corner of his eye, he saw his sister, Keziah, leaning in to whisper to Keturah. "My brother played football in high school," Keziah said. Malachi saw Keturah's face turn bright red. He knew they were talking about him. "You finished school this summer, right?" Keziah asked. Keturah nodded. "Yes, I thought I'd go to college, but you had to marry my brother," Keziah finished for her. "I would have married either way," Keturah said softly. "But as an underboss's wife, college is out of the question." Malachi felt a flicker of respect for her honesty, but it was quickly dampened by Keziah's next comment. "You'll be busy with his kids," Keziah said. "You won't be bored." He saw Keturah's posture stiffen. She looked terrified at the mention of his children. "You'll be fine," Keziah said, reaching for Keturah's hand. "I live close. I can help." Malachi decided he'd heard enough. "You have 2 of your own and a 3rd on the way, Keziah. Your hands are full. Keturah can handle her own household." The table went silent. Keziah sighed but didn't push back. No one pushed back. When the music changed for the first dance, Malachi stood and offered his hand. He led her to the center of the floor, the eyes of the underworld tracking their every move. Keturah followed his lead, but as he pulled her closer, he felt it again. The shaking. "Why are you trembling?" Malachi asked. She looked up at him, her eyes searching his for a trace of humanity. "Why don't you just order me to stop? Maybe my body will obey your commands like everyone else does." Malachi's jaw tightened. "Choose your words carefully in public. You are my wife now. You will show respect." He spun her across the floor, his movements precise and dominant. As the song faded, he leaned his mouth close to her ear, his breath hot against her skin. "Understood." "Understood, sir," she whispered. The word "sir" tasted like a taunt. He gripped her waist a little tighter before releasing her to her father for the next dance. He watched from the sidelines as she moved to her brother, Abram. Abram was a good soldier, but he was looking at Keturah with a pained expression. They spoke in hushed, hurried tones. Malachi saw Abram's mouth twist in disgust, his eyes darting toward the head table. Malachi didn't need to hear the words to know what was being said. Warnings, rumors about Hadassah, stories of what happened to men who disobeyed the Yoder line. He didn't care about the rumors. He didn't care about the fear. He had a role to play, and so did she. Tonight, the shadows of the past would have to make room for the reality of the present. As the dance ended and Keturah walked back toward him, her face was a mask of pure despair. She looked like she was walking toward a gallows. Malachi stepped forward, intercepting her. "It's time to go," he said. "Will you give this old man the honor of dancing with the bride?" Hezekiah asked. Keturah forced a polite smile as her brother slinked away. The elder Yoder leaned heavily on his cane, but his eyes were sharp. "Of course, Mr. Yoder," she replied, dipping into a small curtsy. "Hezekiah, please. We are family now, Keturah." She took his hand, wondering how they would manage a dance given his limp. He seemed to read her mind, handing his cane to a nearby associate. He kept his movements minimal, simply swaying with her in a small circle. "You are very quiet," Hezekiah noted. "I heard you were quite the lively girl." Keturah felt her face heat up. She wondered who had been talking. Abram? Certainly not her mother. "I suppose today is a lot to take in," she managed to say. Hezekiah's gaze was kind, but it didn't erase the chilling stories she had heard about the Yoder family. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial level. "My son's reputation makes me proud. I know he will rule Philadelphia without trouble once I am gone. But I understand that such a reputation might unsettle a young woman." Keturah didn't know how to respond. Tradition demanded she pretend everything was fine, but her pulse was racing. She was a terrible liar, a trait that constantly frustrated her mother. "My wife and I raised Malachi to respect women," Hezekiah added. "He will treat you well." Keturah nodded because she had to, but the words didn't reach her heart. She knew the rumors. People were placing bets on how long she would survive Malachi's temper. Her brother's warnings felt much more grounded in reality than a father's pride. When the music ended, she looked toward Obadiah, the best man. She expected him to claim the next dance, but Obadiah simply shook his head with a strained, apologetic smile. "If I ever tire of living, I'll ask for that dance," Obadiah joked darkly. He immediately turned and asked another woman to the floor. Keturah stood frozen, her mouth slightly open. "What was that about?" Hezekiah chuckled and began his slow walk back toward the head table. "My son is a bit territorial, I'm afraid. You can dance with family, but please refrain from approaching other men. I'd hate to see a conflict at your own wedding." He didn't sound like he was joking. Keturah stopped walking. The weight of the dress and the suffocating rules of this new life felt like they were crushing her ribs. "I think I need to freshen up," she whispered. Hezekiah gave her a knowing look but didn't stop her. Keturah turned on her heel and hurried out of the ballroom. She bypassed the restrooms, seeking a place where she wouldn't have to face her mother's critical eyes or the curious stares of the guests. She found a deserted corridor and sank to the floor. Her white gown puffed out around her like a cloud, a stark contrast to the cold, hard floor. She didn't care about the scandal. She just needed a second to breathe. Steps echoed down the hallway. Keturah didn't bother trying to stand. The layers of silk made a quick escape impossible. Keziah turned the corner, her expression shifting to concern when she saw the bride huddled on the ground. Despite her pregnancy, Keziah carefully lowered herself to sit beside Keturah. "Malachi is a difficult man, Keturah. I won't lie to you," Keziah said softly. Keturah let out a dry laugh. "Difficult I can handle. It's everything else that terrifies me." While Keturah hid in the hallway, Malachi stood by the bar, his eyes tracking every exit. He had noticed her trembling during their first dance. It wasn't the reaction a man wanted from his bride, and it signaled a long night ahead. "Would you excuse us, Thaddeus?" Hezekiah asked, approaching his son. I need a word with Malachi. Thaddeus nodded and moved toward his own wife, leaving the two Yoder men alone. What is it, father? Malachi asked. Your girl is terrified, Hezekiah said bluntly. She's putting up a front, but the fear is all over her face. Malachi's jaw tightened. Don't call her my girl. It makes me feel a century old. Hezekiah laughed. Maybe that's a good thing. It might remind you that she was a child only a few years ago. You need to be good to her, Malachi. I have no intention of being anything else, Malachi snapped. Then go tell her that. Talk to her before the night ends. Take some of that fear away. Malachi looked toward the door where Keturah had vanished. I'm not discussing my wedding night with you, father. And I'm glad for that, Hezekiah replied, his voice turning serious. Cruelty has a place in our world, Malachi. But marriage isn't it. Are we really going to talk about Hadassah today? Malachi's voice was dangerously low. My only concern is that you remember Keturah is not Hadassah. Malachi didn't answer. He turned and walked away, ignoring the breach in etiquette. He found Keziah and Keturah sitting on the floor in the back hallway, looking like two children hiding from a party. The sight of them together made the age gap even more obvious. His sister was younger than him, yet she looked like a grown woman compared to the girl in the white dress. Let me talk to my wife, Malachi ordered. Keziah looked at him, then at Keturah. She reached out for Malachi's hand to help her up. As she passed him, she leaned in. Be a husband for once, not a mobster, she whispered. Malachi ignored the jab. He held his hand out to Keturah. How about some fresh air? Keturah's fingers were cold and shaking as she placed them in his. He pulled her up and guided her toward the terrace. As they passed through the ballroom, Keturah's mother tracked them with wide eyes, checking the clock as if fearing Malachi would skip the reception entirely. Outside, the night air was crisp. The guests on the terrace quickly shuffled back inside, sensing the tension and wanting to give the couple space. Malachi stopped near the stone railing and looked down at her. She looked pretty in the moonlight, but she also looked incredibly fragile. My father told me you're scared, Malachi said. He knew it wasn't the most delicate approach, but he wasn't a man of poetry. Keturah's eyes went wide, her lips parting in surprise. I'm not. She bit her lip and looked away, the light catching the smooth line of her neck. Look at me, Keturah. She raised her head slowly. Malachi took her hand, his thumb brushing over the heavy gold band on her finger. She shivered at the touch. This ring makes you mine, he said. He felt her body stiffen immediately. He cursed himself silently. He sounded like a predator marking territory, which wasn't how he meant it. Not entirely. He wanted to tell her she was safe, but the words felt clumsy in his throat. Tradition binds us both, Keturah. Not just you. He tried again. I know the traditions, she said, her voice small and embarrassed. I'm not talking about the expectations of the family, Malachi said firmly. I'm talking about the fact that as my wife, you are entitled to my protection. Always. Keturah tilted her head, studying him with a mix of curiosity and lingering doubt. Okay. It wasn't much, but the tension in her shoulders dropped an inch. Malachi remained silent. He didn't know what teenagers talked about. He hadn't been a teenager, even when he was 19. He had been a soldier. He looked at the French doors where the music was beginning to slow. Let's return, Malachi said, his voice dropping an octave. It's almost midnight. Keturah's breath hitched, but she didn't pull away as he led her back toward the light. Does that mean it's time? She whispered. The celebratory roars from the ballroom still echoed in the hallway, but inside the elevator, the silence was heavy. Malachi watched the floor numbers climb. Beside him, Keturah clutched a glass of ginger ale like a lifeline. Her knuckles were white. He noticed the slight tremble in her hands and took the glass from her. That is enough, Malachi said, his voice level. It is just soda, she whispered, her blue eyes wide and searching. I did not want to be drunk for this. The doors slid open. Malachi led her down the plush carpet toward the bridal suite. He felt the eyes of the world on them, even here. Every underboss in the city was waiting for the proof of what was about to happen. "What did your mother tell you?" Malachi asked as he unlocked the heavy oak door. Keturah stepped into the vast living area. She looked small against the expensive furniture. "She told me to please you, to hide that I do not know what I am doing." She let out a shaky breath, her gaze dropping to the floor. "Right now, I am just trying not to pass out from fear." Malachi set the glass on the dining table. He watched her for a long moment. She was honest, at least. That was a trait he hadn't expected. He walked toward her, stopping just outside her personal space. "You do not have to be afraid, Keturah. We have all night." She looked toward the bedroom door. "Does waiting make it better?" "Tell me what will help," he countered. "If it felt like I had a choice," she said. Malachi stepped closer, feeling the warmth radiating from her lace-covered skin. He had a reputation to keep, and a boss like Thaddeus who expected results. But he saw the terror in her eyes. "Then make it your choice." She searched his face for a lie. Finding none, she gave a small, solemn nod and walked toward the bedroom. Malachi followed. He stayed a few paces behind, finally allowing himself to look at her as a woman rather than a political obligation. The white silk of her dress hugged her curves, and the scent of strawberries filled the air between them. Keturah stopped by the edge of the king-sized bed. She turned, her face flushed deep red. Malachi reached for the knife sheathed at his chest. It was an old, grim tradition to cut the bride from her dress, symbolizing the end of her old life. "I have to do this," he said, indicating the blade. She didn't flinch. She simply turned her back to him and moved her hair aside. Her neck was elegant and pale. Malachi slid a finger under the lace to protect her skin, his pulse quickening at the contact. He sliced through the fabric. The sound of the silk parting was loud in the quiet room. He stepped back as the dress pooled at her feet. Keturah stood in her undergarments, her back smooth and unblemished. "May I freshen up?" she asked, her voice small. "Of course," Malachi replied, his voice sounding rougher than he intended. He sat on the edge of a bench and waited. He removed his tie and jacket, listening to the water run in the bathroom. He needed patience tonight, a virtue he usually lacked. When the door finally opened, Keturah emerged in a dark blue silk nightgown. Her hair was down now, falling in soft waves over her shoulders. She looked even younger without the heavy wedding veil. "What now?" she asked, hovering in the doorway. Malachi stood and held out his hand. "Come here." She walked to him, stopping so close she had to tilt her head back to see him. She barely reached his chest. Malachi cupped her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. He leaned down and pressed a slow, gentle kiss to her lips. She was frozen at first, then slowly she began to soften. "Why are you still wearing your vest?" she whispered against his mouth. Malachi felt the corner of his lip twitch. He began to undo the buttons, but his fingers felt clumsy. Keturah reached up, her small hands replacing his. She finished the task with more grace than he could manage. "You are very strong," she murmured, her hand lingering near his arm. Malachi took her hand and pressed it against his bicep, flexing the muscle. A small, surprised laugh escaped her. The tension in the room dipped just a fraction. He led her to the bed. "Lie down," he said. As he joined her, the nerves returned to her face. Malachi leaned over her, kissing the hollow of her throat. Suddenly, Keturah jerked and let out a high-pitched giggle. Malachi froze, pulling back to look at her. "What is it?" "I am sorry," she gasped, covering her mouth. I am very ticklish." She looked mortified. Malachi sighed, sitting up. The makeup and the dress had made her look like a queen. But here, in the dim light, she looked like exactly what she was. A girl on the verge of a life she didn't understand. "I am not going to hurt you," he said, his voice softening. He stood to remove the rest of his clothes, but paused when he saw her wide-eyed stare. He kept his boxers on, not wanting to overwhelm her further. He knelt back on the bed and moved his hand to her knee. She flinched again, biting her lip, I think I know one place you aren't ticklish, he said dryly. Her eyes went wide as she realized his meaning. Oh, Keturah, look at me. He waited until her blue eyes met his. If you work with me, this will be easier. I want you to enjoy this. But I have never even been allowed to hold a man's hand for long, she argued, her voice rising. And now you are here and we are like this. I know, he said. Do not cry. I won't, she snapped with a sudden spark of defiance. I am not a baby. Malachi liked that spark. He leaned down and kissed her again, this time deeper. He tasted the ginger ale on her breath and the sweetness of her skin. He felt her hands move to his shoulders, tentatively holding on. He moved his hand to the hem of her nightgown. May I? She nodded. He pulled the silk over her head and set it aside. She was beautiful, pale skin, soft curves, and a look of pure innocence that made Malachi's chest tighten. He spent the next several minutes focusing entirely on her, using his hands and lips to ease the stiffness out of her limbs. He watched her closely, looking for signs of comfort. When he moved between her legs, she placed a hand on his forehead, stopping him. What are you doing now? She asked, her nose wrinkling. I am trying to make sure you are ready, he explained. Most women find this helps with the pain. You are going to kiss me there? Malachi couldn't help it. He laughed. Yes, I am. He was patient. He ignored his own mounting desire to focus on her. He stayed there for a long time, listening to her breath hitch and her fingers tangle in his hair. But eventually, she shook her head, her face full of frustration. I cannot, she whispered. I am too nervous. I am sorry. Do not be sorry, Malachi said. He moved back up, looking down at her. Are you ready for the rest? Keturah took a deep breath and nodded. Malachi shed his remaining clothes. When she saw him fully, her eyes nearly doubled in size. Oh boy, she whispered. Malachi fought the urge to laugh again. He moved over her, bracing his weight on his elbows so he wouldn't crush her. Just breathe, Keturah. Stay with me. Do you take the pill? Malachi asked. The question felt cold, stripping away whatever remained of the wedding night's romantic fog. He watched Keturah in the dim light of the bedroom. She gave a quick, silent nod. He moved over her, but the moment he tried to guide her, she flinched. The rejection sparked a flicker of irritation in his chest, a low growl of frustration that he fought to keep inside. Keturah, he said, his voice dropping an octave. Can you hold me? She whispered. Malachi felt his pulse skip. The request was so simple, so vulnerable, that it caught him off guard. He lowered himself onto his elbows, sliding one arm beneath her shoulders. He pulled her flush against his chest, her small frame disappearing against his muscle. Like this, he murmured. Their faces were inches apart. She looked up at him with wide, searching eyes, as if looking for a protector rather than a husband. Malachi leaned down, brushing his lips against the corner of her mouth and then her lips. He shifted his weight, and her breath hitched. Breathe out, he coached. She obeyed, and he moved forward. Her fingers dug into his bicep, her face tightening with a flash of discomfort. If it's too much, tell me, Malachi said. We'll stop and figure it out. He almost regretted the offer. He was a man with needs, after all, but the grateful smile she gave him made his resolve soften. He felt her tension ease just a fraction. Slowly, he pressed forward. She squeezed her eyes shut, a sharp gasp escaping her lips as she felt the full weight of the moment. Malachi stayed still, his own breathing ragged. He waited for her to adjust, feeling the frantic beat of her heart against his own. Keturah, how are you? Okay, she said, her voice shaking. It's strange, feeling you like this. It's very full. A small smile tugged at his mouth. You're overthinking it. I'm talking nonsense, aren't I? He shook his head, his hand moving to stroke her cheek. He began to move with shallow, careful motions, gradually increasing the pace as she adjusted to him. She remained tense, but she didn't cry or pull away. For that, he was grateful. It didn't take long for him to reach his limit. He didn't see the point in dragging it out, knowing she was likely waiting for the moment to be over. When the finish came, he stilled, pressing his forehead into the pillow beside her. He listened intently, dreading the sound of a sob or a plea to leave. Silence followed. Relief washed over him. He rolled off her but stayed close. "Thank you," she whispered, turning on her side to face him. Malachi studied her flushed face. "For what?" "For being patient. For being careful." He frowned. "Why wouldn't I be?" "Women talk, Malachi. Some men. They like the dominance. They like to cause pain just to prove they can." The girl was gone. A woman stood in her place, speaking truths about the world he lived in. Malachi sat up, his expression hardening into the mask he wore for the underworld. "I don't need to hurt you to show my dominance," he said firmly. "I rule over people every day. I enjoy violence when it's necessary for business, but not against women. And any man who thinks causing pain is a sign of strength doesn't know how to be a man." Keturah let out a small, surprised laugh. "Do you know how to be one?" "I think I have a handle on it," he replied, his voice rumbling with a low chuckle. "Today wasn't for your pleasure, but soon it will be." She tilted her head, considering his words. "Okay." Malachi looked down at his body, seeing the evidence of the night on his skin. He sat up fully and reached for her hand. "Sit up for a second." She followed his lead, her eyes widening as she saw the mess on the sheets. Her nose wrinkled in distaste. "That's a bit much." "It's tradition," Malachi said. He brushed a stray hair from her face. Her eyes were a piercing blue, like a summer sky, and the slight upturn of her nose gave her a defiant, coy look. "Do you find me pretty?" she asked, biting her lower lip. "Yes," he said, his thumb grazing the back of her hand.
Ido.
"Oh, I wasn't sure. You didn't act like you cared." "I've spent years perfecting a poker face, Keturah. It's a requirement for my job. But I find you very attractive." "Usually I can tell," she mused. "Men are usually obvious. They get that look, like they want to devour you." Something dark and possessive coiled in Malachi's gut. "Did that happen often? Men looking at you like that?" "Occasionally," she said casually. "Visitors of my father. Strangers in the street. No one ever dared approach me, though." "Good," Malachi growled. She arched an eyebrow. "Are you jealous?"
I'm possessive.
"I don't share what belongs to me." To his surprise, she rolled her eyes. No one rolled their eyes at the underboss. "You're jealous of men watching from a distance?" she asked. "You gave me my first kiss in church today. You've never had to share, and you never will. You've never looked at a man that way?" he pressed.
No.
"I never looked long enough to form an opinion. It didn't seem smart, considering I wasn't the one picking my husband." Malachi swung his legs out of the bed. "I'm going to clean up." He felt her eyes on his back as he walked toward the bathroom. He could feel her gaze tracing the muscles of his shoulders and the line of his spine. When he reached the door, he heard her shuffle out of bed behind him. She looked at the stained linens with a look of pure mortification. "Do we really have to show these?" she asked. "That was the whole point of this, Keturah." Her face fell. "So you only did this for the presentation?" Malachi stopped and looked at her. She stood there, naked and vulnerable, looking for some sign that she was more than a contract. He saw the way she looked at him, the genuine attraction in her eyes. "I'm a man," he said simply. He stepped into the shower, and she followed a moment later. The space felt much smaller with both of them inside. He watched as she soaped herself, trying to ignore the way the water slicked her skin. He turned his attention to cleaning himself, watching the water turn pink at their feet. "It'll be better in a few days," he said, noticing her wince as she cleaned herself. "That long?" Malachi's mind flashed to the past, to another woman and another life. His eyes darkened. "We'll see." He killed the water and handed her a towel. They dried off in silence. Physically, they had been as close as a man and woman could be, but the emotional wall between them felt miles thick. He went to the sink to brush his teeth, feeling her eyes on him again. When he emerged from the bathroom in his pajama bottoms, she was already tucked under the covers, watching him. He climbed in on his side, leaving a wide gap between them. "What is it?" he asked, staying on his back. "You don't have to worry. I've done my duty for the night." "Duty?" she whispered. "Is that all it is?" "I'm not a mind reader, Keturah. I don't have the patience for guessing games." He saw the glint of tears in her eyes and felt a pang of guilt. He propped himself up on one elbow. "Are you in pain? Did I hurt you?" She didn't answer. Instead, she reached out and grabbed his hand, pulling herself closer until she was tucked against his side. She rested her head on his chest and draped a leg over his. "Can we just stay like this?" she asked. Malachi didn't move for a long moment. Then he sighed and opened his arm, letting her settle in. She began to trace the hair on his chest, her fingers wandering lower toward his waistband. He caught her hand, his voice strained. "Keturah, did I do something wrong?" He let out a sound that was half groan, half laugh. He took her hand and pressed it flat against his sternum. "It stays there." He reached over and clicked off the lamp. "I'm sorry if I made you uncomfortable," she whispered. "I'm not uncomfortable," he grunted. "I know you don't mean to make me feel the way I do. That's the problem. Now sleep." He felt her settle against him, her breathing slowing as she drifted off. But the contact was too much. The warmth, the scent of her, the memory of her body. It was a distraction he couldn't afford. "Are you going to fall asleep like that?" he asked. "You told me to sleep. On your side. Not in my arms." He felt her stiffen. Without a word, she scrambled to the far side of the bed. The silence that followed was heavy. He watched the outline of her head in the dark and heard the hitch in her breath. She was crying. "I can't sleep with someone touching me," he murmured into the dark. "Anyone." She nodded silently. "I guess it's fitting," Malachi said, his voice cold and hollow. "My second wedding night ends just like the first, with a crying wife. The sheets won't be the only thing they're looking for, Keturah," Malachi said, his voice gravelly from sleep. He stayed propped on one elbow, watching the morning light hit his new wife's face. Her skin was pale, her lashes still damp from the tears she'd shed before sleep finally claimed her. She looked young, dangerously young, and for a moment, the ghost of Hadassah's blood-soaked body vanished from his mind. Usually, his dead wife occupied every corner of his room, a silent reminder of a life that ended in violence. But Keturah was different. She had moved closer to him in her sleep, her breathing soft and rhythmic. Malachi swung his legs out of bed, putting his back to her. The mattress shifted as she woke. When he looked over his shoulder, she was rubbing her eyes, her hair a messy halo around her head. "We need to move," he said, reaching for his phone. "The women will be here for the sheets soon." Keturah glanced at the watch on the nightstand. "It's only 8. They won't come this early, will they?" "They will if I tell them to." Malachi typed a quick message to his sister, Keziah. 30 minutes. Keziah's reply was instant. "No sleeping in on the wedding night? Stay out of my business," he shot back. He stood up, ignoring the way Keturah watched him. She wasn't looking at him with the disgust Hadassah always had. It was a small, strange victory. "Shower first. I need to shave. We have meetings, and I'm seeing Thaddeus for lunch." Keturah bit her lip and nodded, heading for the bathroom. 15 minutes later, she emerged in a red dress that hugged her frame. It made her look elegant, but it didn't hide the puffiness around her eyes. "Should I use makeup to hide that I cried?" she asked, her voice quiet. "Or do you want people to think you hurt me?" Malachi paused, his hand on the shower door. He frowned. "Why would I want that? I thought maybe the men downstairs would fear you more if they thought you were cruel to me." "I am feared for plenty of reasons," Malachi said, his tone turning cold. "I don't need my sisters breathing down my neck because they saw you crying. Cover it up." He stepped into the shower, the hot water doing little to wash away the irritation. When he came out, dressed in a sharp 3-piece suit, he found her in the living area of the suite. She was smiling at her phone. "Who are you talking to?" he demanded, walking over to tower above her. Keturah's head snapped up. "Excuse me? Who?" he growled. "Your sister, Keziah." Malachi snatched the phone from her hand. He scrolled through the messages. Keziah was apologizing for his dickheadness. He felt a vain throb in his temple. "Trust is the base of a marriage," Keturah said, standing up to face him. "What do you know about marriage, girl?" Malachi snapped. "I've lived through one. You've barely lived at all." The hurt on her face was sharp. "I wonder if Hadassah would agree," she whispered. The air in the room turned brittle. Before Malachi could find his voice, a knock at the door broke the tension. He threw the door open to find Keziah and a group of women, including Keturah's mother. "Go in. Take the sheets. Do it quickly," he barked. He pulled Keziah aside as the women shuffled past. "Stay out of my marriage. And don't you dare mention Hadassah to her again." Keziah yanked her arm back. "I'll do what I want, Malachi." Inside the room, Keturah was putting on a brave face, smiling for the women. Malachi walked over and placed a firm hand on her lower back. "We're going down to breakfast." They walked to the elevator in silence. As the doors closed, he felt the tension radiating off her. "The worst part is over," he said. "Are you talking about the wedding night?" Keturah asked, a small, playful twitch at the corner of her mouth. "You were trembling," he reminded her. "It was scary," she admitted. "But it wasn't as bad as I thought it would be." Malachi didn't know how to respond to that kind of honesty. "Good, I suppose." The breakfast was a sea of faces. Family, captains, and soldiers. When the mothers brought the stained sheet into the banquet hall, Keturah went beet red. "This is mortifying," she hissed. "It's tradition," Malachi replied, though he didn't like the display much either. "It's a sign of your honor." "And your ruthlessness?" she countered, her eyes twinkling with a secret joke. "I suppose it is." The day dragged on through meetings and politics. By the time they reached Malachi's mansion that evening, the sun had long set. The large brownstone stood like a fortress against the November chill. "This is your home," Malachi said as he unlocked the front door. A high-pitched yapping greeted them. A small, reddish ball of fur charged into the hall, latching onto Malachi's expensive trouser leg. "Stay back," Malachi snarled, trying to shake the dog off. "Dorcas, I told you to keep this animal locked away." He reached down to grab the dog, but the creature snapped at his hand, drawing a bead of blood. Malachi's face darkened with fury. He snatched the dog by the scruff of its neck. For a second, he looked ready to throw it through a wall. "Don't hurt it," Keturah cried, reaching for his arm. Dorcas, the housekeeper, came running into the hall, then stopped dead, cursing as she stepped in a fresh pile of dog mess on the granite floor. "That's it," Malachi growled. "This thing is gone tomorrow." He marched to the terrace door, opened it, and dropped the dog into the cold night. "You can't do that," Keturah said, her voice shaking with indignation. "Clean this up," Malachi ordered Dorcas. He walked to the liquor cabinet and poured a stiff drink. Keturah didn't move. She watched the dog pressed against the glass, shivering. She walked toward the door. "Don't," Malachi said. It wasn't a shout, but it carried the weight of a death sentence. "Keturah, I said don't." She ignored him. She opened the door and scooped the shivering dog into her arms. Malachi stood up, his shadows stretching long across the floor. He blocked her path. "I gave you an order. That animal stays outside." "Then I'll stay outside with it," Keturah said, her chin lifted. "We can keep each other warm." Malachi stared at her, his eyes narrowed. "You think I believe you'd sleep in the cold for a dog? Your parents never mentioned you were this stubborn. They were too busy telling me you'd beat me to death if I didn't listen," she muttered. Malachi's expression shifted. The anger didn't vanish, but it softened into something else. Something weary. He reached out and cupped her chin. "You won't ever have a reason to fear that here." "Are you sure?" she asked. "Absolutely." He sighed, his thumb brushing her jaw. "Now put the dog down."
No.
Malachi let out a short, surprised laugh. You really are something else. He looked at the dog, then back at her. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. I'll walk her, Keturah said firmly. I'll take care of her. Malachi looked at his wife, then at the house that felt more like a tomb than a home. He saw the fire in her eyes and realized his life was about to change in ways he couldn't control. Fine, he rasped. But if I see one more mess on this floor, the dog goes. Keturah smiled, a real, bright smile that made his chest tighten. Deal. Ideals are just teenage foolishness, Malachi muttered, his voice a low grate of gravel. He watched Keturah through narrowed eyes. She stood there with a calm, knowing look that only the young could manage. She thought she understood the world, but the world hadn't chewed her up yet. Malachi felt the heat of frustration humming under his skin. It wasn't just her. It was the weight of the last few months. He had allowed this marriage, convinced himself an 18-year-old could step into a dead woman's shoes and play the role of wife and mother. Looking at her now, the thought of her becoming Hadassah 2.0 made his stomach turn. Come now, he said, his tone a warning.